Well, a big hello to everybody who's joining our webinar today. My name is Rachel Crisso, and I'm speaking today on behalf of CRCC Asia. And I'm going to be running the webinar with a good colleague and friend of mine, Erica Sebastian from the University of Pennsylvania. So let's begin by asking ourselves why we might be talking about this today. Why should my institution offer international internships? It's too much work. I think this is something that many of us who work in international internships have either felt ourselves or come across with colleagues. Many of us love what we do, love the outcomes, students love the internships, and we just want more and more students to go abroad. However, there becomes a tipping point where we can feel overwhelmed and just have no more capacity in order to help students go abroad. So we wanted to kind of do a deep dive into this today, myself and Erica. So I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about myself first of all, and then I'll introduce Erica. So I was with the University of the University of Michigan for many years, where I founded and ran the International Internship Program, sending anywhere up to 150 students abroad for international internships each summer. And I remember coming across, many students, more who wanted to go abroad and not being able to find the capacity in order to get everybody to do that. I'm now working as an independent consultant and spending quite a bit of my time with CRCC Asia, who I've had about a 7 or 8 year relationship with now. And they send students abroad to intern in China, but also in Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, India, and also in Manchester in the UK. And now I'll let Erica introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. This is Erica Sebastian. As you can see, I'm the Senior Associate Director for Penn Abroad at the University of Pennsylvania. And so Penn Abroad is really the hub office at the University of Pennsylvania for all global programming. So we're serving all of Penn's 12 schools and 25,000 students. And that includes a portfolio of many types of global programs, semester and year academic study abroad and exchange. We do short-term faculty-led, we run research and internship programs. Most relevant to this particular webinar is my role directing the Global Research and Internship Program at Penn, known as the GRIP, which we love our acronym. The GRIP program has been around for over 10 years now at Penn and has grown substantially. And so I will be drawing from my experience working with our GRIP program throughout this presentation. And I thought I would just share a couple quick points about what the GRIP is so that you have that framework as I speak further today. So GRIP is an 12-week long non-credit summer internship. It takes place in over 30 countries, and we have about 200 participants a year. We're in a huge array of locations as well as industries and serve as many students as possible. Every intern going on the GRIP program does receive funding from our office, which I will be speaking about later, and it is a very competitive program. So we've been so successful in marketing this opportunity that we have about a 35% acceptance rate. So for every 200 participants, we get around 600 or more applications each year. So we've seen huge growth over the past couple of years. And again, a lot of what I'll be speaking to today will be drawing from that experience of growing this program so substantially in the past couple of years. So I'm going to also now talk a little bit about why internships even matter. And so why are we doing international internships in the first place? And I also like to think, who are the stakeholders that this is important to, including our students, our universities, of course, and also employers, both those involved in the programs and those for whom our students will eventually work. So first and foremost, in IIE's Open Doors, we have some statistics here on the slide, but we're seeing a massive increase in experiential programs and non-credit programs, including internships, work, and volunteering abroad. You can see that there's been an increase of 66% in just 3 years, and this is really a continuation of a trend we've been seeing now for a decade and beyond. we are finding that in general, students are seeking programs that are not only shorter, but are also higher in impact and more career oriented. If your institutions are anything like Penn, our students are what I like to describe internship obsessed, and they are more and more asking for these real life career oriented high impact experiences. We also find in turn, as a result, our institutions and our universities for whom we work are more focused than ever on making sure that students are employable after graduation. And so we're looking for direct links between the experience they're having at our universities, their global competency, and their ultimate employability. And lastly, we're finding that the data shows that global experiences and internships in particular are actually quite connected, according to the data, to greater skills in the workplace and greater preparation for the workplace, and ultimately greater success both in the workplace and in graduate school. You'll see on the bottom left here, I have a little bit of information about why international internships are important to Penn as well. And really you can see that there has just been an enormous increase in the student demand, with not only a massive growth in our short-term programs that are credit bearing, but also applications to summer internships growing by over 200% in just a few years. So really a testament to the increased demand that we're trying to meet. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel now, who's going to talk about, take a closer look.
Great, thank you so much, Erica. Yes, so we know that students go abroad for many different reasons, personal growth. If they're doing an internship abroad, often it's also to gain work experience. And this leads us to start thinking about enhanced employability for our students, and also career readiness, and the role that we're playing getting our students ready to go onto the job market, be it international or not. So there are three links here, and we'll be sharing these slides after the webinar today. So here are three great links, we think, to international reports that have aligned employability of study abroad, specifically mentioning international internships over the last 3 years. All reports are excellent and review, excellent for perhaps you to review or to share with your colleagues when you're making the case for international internship programs at your university. So please do afterwards, once you receive this, take a little dive into there and have a look at these studies. I think we can all use as much data as possible once especially if we're looking for funding for our programs. And this slide, we talk specifically about outcomes of international internships for CRCC Asia. And this is pulled from the post-internship study results when we ask students about their experience. As you can see, a very high number feel that their international internship played a big role in getting them ready for graduation and employment once they were graduating. Cultural agility, extremely high. They've lived abroad, they've worked abroad, they've shown that they can adapt to new surroundings, not only living day to day, but actually in a work environment. And I certainly think that future employers are impressed by that kind of flexibility. Students also feel they've made good global connections with the people they meet. They've expanded their own networks, and as they go on the job market, they find they just know a lot more people and have a lot more avenues to explore. And then finally, not that this is ever really the end goal of international internships, we do find that 1 out of 5 students were offered future employment from their host company. So it's the beginning for them on the career ladder. So when we look at students, feelings once they come back, they fill out these surveys, and you can just see there's a couple of quotes here. Invaluable for my professional and personal development, talking about gaining cultural flexibility, helping get a job in their field, etc. So these are just a few kind of from the horse's mouth. Once they get back, they're feeling more confident, they're feeling ready to go on the job market, they're feeling ready to talk about their experience in job interviews, and generally more career ready than they would have been otherwise. And I'm going to hand this back to Erica now. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thanks, Rachel. So we've titled this is too much work. So I figured it might make some sense to dive into what actually is all of this work that we're doing and what does it take to run an international internship program. So I'm going to speak briefly about the broad buckets of things to be considering when you're thinking about managing, running, and maintaining an international internship program. First and foremost, if I had to choose, I would say relationships are the #1 most important aspect of these programs and is something that we spend a huge amount of time on. So our relationships are crucial with a number of stakeholders. Of course, we are constantly developing placements with employers and then maintaining those relationships. In developing placements, can involve third-party providers like CRCC Asia, with whom we've had a great experience, working directly with employer connections that you may have identified through your alumni contacts, through faculty, or through other networks. And keeping those lines of communication open and constant is absolutely crucial. Maintaining those relationships and maintaining that ongoing communication throughout the year, even when your program is not running, is also something that is always worth the investment of time and will ultimately pay off in the form of having a really, really clear, transparent, and mutually agreed upon experience for the internships themselves. We also spend a lot of time building buy-in among our campus partners here. So while we and Penn Abroad are running our own program, we rely very, very heavily on our partners to support us and to support their students who may be interacting with them. We really do rely on them, not from everything from marketing to funding support in a number of different capacities. If there's a student issue abroad, we really do pull on our networks, and I'll talk about that a bit more shortly as well. And lastly, we're maintaining relationships with our students. We are constantly meeting potential students and putting them through advising, working with them throughout their experience, and always speaking to our returnees and thinking of them as ambassadors, both for their employer and for the GRIT program at large. The second big bucket is our student service and support. So this is where I would say you're going to spend quite a bit of time and resource on student advising, especially when it comes to managing expectations. I can't say this enough, and I think we all do say it a lot, but we absolutely need to work together to make sure that students understand what this experience is, what it is not going to be, and really go into this with eyes wide open so that they're ready to embrace the international internship experience, whatever it may be for them. We spend a huge amount of time marketing our program as well and building what I've coined here as buzz. We want students to be talking about this, and we didn't quadruple the number of applications we're getting in a few years by kind of resting on our laurels. We have huge marketing campaigns using our campus partners as a network, using our student ambassadors as a network to make sure that students know about our programs and that our partners also know about our programs and feel excited about it. We're providing tremendous pre-departure support, leaning heavily on our employers and partners to make sure that students are not only getting traditional pre-departure information that we would provide in study abroad, insurance, safety, etc., but also that they're prepared for a very different work environment abroad. We continue to maintain contact with students while they are abroad, which is certainly a best practice and continuing to support them. And then that extends beyond the experience to their re-entry, making sure that students have a smooth transition back to campus after their program, and then also that they're ready to really leverage that experience and talk about the experience they've had in future employability. The third bucket I'll talk about is the program administration, possibly the least glamorous, but perhaps one of the most important. You got to actually manage the program. And so I think of this as managing your applications and your admissions process. Keeping this as streamlined and clear as possible is always going to be beneficial to you and your students. Coordinating all financial aspects. If you have funding, as Penn is very lucky to have, figuring out how you're dispersing that money, where it's coming from, any stewardship that may be required. If you're not funding them, how might you help students identify funding and resources and ultimately make this experience accessible? Is your program credit bearing? At Penn, our program is not credit bearing, which adds an additional administrative layer, which is how do you make sure they show up and complete the program if there's no credit, if there's no risk of failing, how do you make sure that they remain engaged? And so we put a lot of resource into that. If you're giving credit, making sure that you understand the syllabus, the academic objectives, and how ultimately that credit is going to be transferred. And lastly, and most importantly, and ever timely, is our risk management and managing student issues abroad, which unfortunately seem to happen every year. There's always something, small or large, preferably small, and we need to remain constantly vigilant and available to our students and to our partners to make sure that we're managing those and ensuring that our students are safe and successful. And lastly, assessment. Assessment is the thing that I think of these 4 buckets is the most likely to fall off your radar and is the one that will really, really ensure that your program can continue to grow and to flourish. So first and foremost, it's crucial that you solicit feedback. You want to hear not only from your students about their experience, but you want to hear from your employers. I'd strongly recommend doing that on an annual basis. You want to actually listen to their feedback and do something about it. So if you're receiving critical feedback, you want to make sure that you're reviewing that you have a process in your office in place to actually review feedback and implement improvements that are necessary. And lastly, anytime you're adding new placements, you want to be sure that you're putting them through a vetting process, a reference check as needed, and that you're engaging in ongoing assessment of existing placements. So that was a lot of work that I've talked about. So I want to talk about how you can get all this done. Sorry if I've stressed any of you out, but really the idea is to think about what will make this doable. And so this is really where our partnerships come in. So first and foremost, thinking about how you're partnering either with your third-party provider or with direct employers, if that's the route you choose. Penn does a little bit of both. And so we found that both of those partnerships have been extremely valuable to help us manage all of this. So there are things that you can delegate. And my best piece of advice is not to ever run this program alone. Your provider partners and your employers are there to help. And it is our role as administrators to communicate to them what our expectations are for them and the sort of who's doing what. And in that way, once you've clearly articulated your expectations of them and they've articulated their expectations of you, you're ultimately sharing the work. So everything from interviewing students, we do far less of this now that we have partners that are assisting with this, helping students prepare their applications, setting their expectations, finding them housing, everything from travel arrangements, visas are absolutely crucial, welcome orientations, networking, communication, and health and safety. Simply, we cannot do these without our partners. And so it's important to really, really look at this as a partnership and not feel like the burden is solely on your shoulders. In addition to your external partners being your third-party providers and your employers themselves, remember that you have a whole campus of partners as well, and they can help too. In fact, you never really want to reinvent the wheel, as I like to say. Your campus partners can help. And if you aren't working with them yet, there's always opportunities to bridge those divides, build those relationships, and get to know them and how they can support your international internship program and how you can support them in turn. You simply do not need to be everything to everyone, and you will not be able to do it alone. And so here's some recommendations of partners that we recommend making some relationships with. So especially if your program is credit bearing, you want to be building relationships with your academic advisors. I actually need to do this even with a non-credit bearing program because students are talking to their academic advisors. They want to think about how an international internship might fit into their experience at Penn holistically. And so those are people that they're going to as a first point of contact. You want to make sure know about your program and are able to articulate its value. Career services, some of you maybe are even in career services. I find that international internship programs sit in different places at different universities. Leverage their expertise. We have a policy in Penn Abroad. We don't read your resume and cover letter for you. We send you to career services. Think of all the hours that we're spending, that we're saving, really building that partnership to make sure that students are getting those services, but that we don't have to deliver every single one. Risk management is such a collaborative effort, as I'm sure it is on your campuses, but everything from pre-departure preparation, insurance, and ultimately managing a crisis abroad is always, always a team effort and should never be dealt with alone. So get to know who your resources are and build a risk management team. Counseling and health services has become something that we're leveraging more and more. And so we find that we've been able to work with our offices to ensure that they can still provide services to our students who are remote on the phone, that students understand what they can get from these services before they leave, while they're abroad, and then still continue to liaise with them on return. And then lastly, diversity offices and our financial aid offices are offices that we rely on very heavily to help us imagine how we can make sure our program is diverse and accessible. And that's everything from tapping into audiences of students like our first generation and low-income populations who just may not think that this program is accessible. They may have no idea that we even have funding or that they even could make this a reality. And so making those partnerships, getting in front of those audiences is so important, and those relationships make that possible. And financial aid, of course, if your program is credit bearing and that is something that they can apply to the program, it is absolutely crucial that you learn how that will work and how to articulate that to your student audience. So again, bottom line, don't do this alone. So now I'm going to speak a little bit about why it's worth it. So now that I've scared you fully, I want to think about what are we getting out of this and why has this been a good investment of our time? So on the Penn side, speaking for the University of Pennsylvania, we have invested in both staffing and funding for students, but that has not always been the case. So up until 3 years ago, for a program that's been around for 11 years, we didn't have a full-time person working on this program, and that is something that we've built over time through small successes that have led to greater investment. The things that we've been able to demonstrate to our leadership to make this worth an investment is first and foremost an increased access to programs abroad and an increased diversity of students participating in the program. The more diverse your global programs portfolio is, the more different types of students are going to participate. Not every student wants to study abroad or do a short term. Not every student wants to do an internship abroad. The more opportunity that you're able to provide, the more different types of students and audiences you're going to be able to tap into. We also meet the internship demand on campus and simultaneously are able to pair that with the global programming demand. Penn has a strategic framework for global initiatives that just launched a couple of years ago, and we are explicitly expected to educate global citizens and provide every Penn student with a meaningful global experience. And consequently, we also know that there is a huge internship culture here at Penn and that students are expecting to complete multiple internships during their time here. Having an international internship program has allowed us to achieve both of these goals simultaneously. And lastly, there are tangible outcomes for students as well. If you look at the IEA data here, you'll find that the outcomes of participating in these programs are leading to better job placement, making students stronger candidates for jobs, and giving them stronger skills in the workplace once they go on to graduate. So we don't want to just dump information on you without giving you some path forward. And so here are some suggested next steps for you to take back to your office and respective institutions to either build or grow your international internship program. At Penn, we do get over 600 applications a year and it is competitive, but we didn't just kind of sit back and wait for those to come in. We have been working quite hard to make that happen, and those things have happened across these 6 categories. First and foremost, build your network. Get to know these offices that I've mentioned earlier. Get to know your alumni team. Do you have alumni that might want to offer internships? Are there faculty who are already working abroad that might want to take students with them? What can career services do for you, etc.? I like to call this second one, find your hook. This is something that I harp on a lot. What makes your program special? Why should a student participate in your program as opposed to something else? Why should they go abroad for an international internship through your program instead of staying home? Figure out what makes your program special, and that is going to be particular to your student body. Is it credit? Is it that you're offering funding? Is it that you have a portfolio of really, really interesting and diverse placements in very interesting locations? Find something that you think will really tap into the audience that you have and run with that. And then market it. You have to leverage that hook to make sure that students know about it and feel excited about it. Early and often is always the way to go when it comes to info sessions, email campaigns, and marketing materials. Make sure you have a great website, keep it updated, and make sure that you're accessible year-round to take questions and build buzz. Even if we're not actually doing advising, we are always letting students know about the program and making sure that they're excited for its launch each year. Build your resources is absolutely crucial, and this tends to relate primarily to funding, but also to your less financial aspects. So if you have funding, obviously that's a huge benefit. You want to make sure you know what it is, how much it is, and how you're going to use it, and have a plan. And if you have funding, make sure students know about that and how they can access it. But also make your program accessible in a number of smaller ways. Don't have an overly complicated application. Only require the things you actually need. For example, at GRIP a couple of years ago, we dropped our GPA requirement because we realized this is a non-credit bearing program, and the students, we're looking for the best candidate for the job. And if they have a 2.8 GPA, but they're the perfect candidate, why would we stand in their way? That's a Penn specific decision, but think about what it would look like on your campus to streamline your process. Use your ambassadors, use your student stories, tell that story, and get students excited by using your website as a real launching point. Assess your program. Make sure that if you have an existing program, you know how it's going and not just how you think it's going. Be open and flexible to hear good and bad feedback from your employers and from your students, and make sure that you actually have a plan in place to implement changes over time and maintain flexibility. And lastly, and possibly most importantly, especially to you who do not have any funding or feel like a burden is sitting just on your shoulders, the way that you are going to eventually get staff and funding is by telling your story to your leadership. What are the successes of your program? If you don't have a program yet, find students who are doing international internships independently on your campus and help to tell their story. Find a way to tell the story of the value of international internships on your campus and use that to garner support from your senior leadership. And this is the path forward. It can take a couple of years, but it is time very well spent.
All right. Well, thank you both, Erica and Rachel, for sharing your experiences and more about international internships and why, despite the work and the effort, it will pay off in the long run. I do welcome any attendee to raise their hand if they do have a question, and I do have 4 questions to kind of start us off with. So, Rachel and Erica, what are some of the struggles that you face from getting buy-in for internships abroad on campus?
I can start if you like and give you a little break, Erica, because you had a lot of great input there. The struggles, I think probably the biggest struggle at the top of everybody's mind is funding, in many ways. And so we worked quite hard when I was at the University of Michigan to ensure that students had all the information at their disposal of accessible funding for them. And it turns out in a big university, there are pockets of money that are available. So even if, unlike lucky Penn students where the programs are paid for, if that's not the case, then your office should really help students identify where they can get funding. And there are matching funding. There's their departments, lots of avenues, but it's well worth diving into that and making that information accessible to students. Other issues, I don't know, Erica?
Yeah, I think that's all correct. And I find also that there's just a lot of competing demands. One of the things that I think about a lot is just how much is being thrown at these students. Not that I'm a dinosaur by any means, but I think about my own undergraduate experience and how I just didn't have the number of opportunities being thrown at me that our students have these days. And the faculty and staff across campus feel the same way. They have their own programs that they're trying to market. And a lot of those are also domestic, and they may be internships or research, but they don't necessarily always have that global focus. And so I think a lot of it is about educating our campus partners about how we can work together to make sure that students understand all of their options and not feel like we're competing with each other.
Right, and I'll just add a little bit there just in case we didn't quite get at the heart of that question, because I do see specifically internships abroad, and I'm wondering if you're kind of saying, why should a student decide to go abroad and intern as opposed to interning at home in the US? And I think that is an important point, and I think the education piece comes in here quite largely, and having both the students and the advisors and career advisors aware of the advantages of doing an international internship as opposed to an internship at home. And I think the story I always used to tell is how a student can really stand out from the crowd, or really stand out from other potential candidates by sharing some kooky international story of something that they did while they were abroad, or some even funny things that happen during their internships. So, and it can make for an interesting standout piece that just kind of sets them apart from the crowd a little bit when they're in that job search.
Great. And we are aware of time, but I do promise we will be sharing out this PowerPoint in a PDF, as well as the recording of all the questions and answers that we're taking right now. So moving forward, a great question could be, how do you assess partners, especially looking at due diligence, and particularly if working outside of the university and provider system with volunteer alumni?
Yeah, I'll let you take that, Erica.
Sure. This is an art, not a science, so I will start with that. Assessment is tricky, and it does require a lot of time to do well. I'm not going to pretend that we have it perfectly solved, but some of the ways that we assess partners are, first and foremost, actually reading student surveys. I hate to drop it down so low, but I have had experiences in the past where we just don't find the time to read what students are saying. And so really make that time is sort of your low-hanging fruit. Students are telling you what they think about your program. If they didn't feel safe, if they felt discriminated against, if they felt that they were not given the opportunity that they were promised, you need to listen to them. We also hold debriefing sessions at the end of every summer. Our program's only in the summer, and so early in the fall, we hold a number of debriefing sessions. We don't require them to come, but we do offer them pizza, so lots of people come, and we find that is a great way to get in front of students, and we learn quite a bit from there. We also do send 3 surveys through the summer, so we send one toward the beginning, one at the middle, and one at the end, and it's interesting to see what students will be willing to divulge when they're not just being asked face-to-face, but they're just filling in a question. We recently added, I think 2 years ago, a question that said, do you feel safe in your housing, and do you feel safe in your internship? It's just a general question, and again, every so often we have a student answer no. So just little things like that that can make a big difference. Is think about how you're talking to your students, and then make sure you're actually listening. Also, similarly with employers, they will tell you if there's been a problem. So again, kind of a low-hanging fruit, making sure you're asking them and finding a formalized way to have those conversations every year, or even more than every year, is all simple things that you can do. In addition, we always do, in terms of vetting, we always do reference checks as well. We want to make sure that every employer that we're working with has worked with not only interns before, but preferably ones coming from the United States. We are a particular breed of student here in the US, and so we like to make sure that we're not the ones kind of teaching them how to do this for the first time. Is something that we prioritize. And hear how that's gone for other institutions. And then in terms of assessment on site, this is something that is always a good idea, is very expensive. And so speaking about partnerships like I was earlier, we actually try very hard to physically visit every single employer on a 3 to 5 year cycle. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's not always me or a member of my team. So this is where we really are closely connected with our regionally focused schools and centers here on campus, our admissions team, our international students team, et cetera. And we will often work together to request that those offices have a touch point with our employer and specific things that they're looking for to make sure that they realize that we take the relationship seriously and keep it rigorous. So those are a few things that we do.
Excellent. And moving on to the next question, how do you assess funding need?
I'll start off if that's okay, Erica, and I'll say that at the University of Michigan, certainly we use the Office of Financial Aid, and that was kind of very cut and dried, and we did find there was kind of a middle section, if you like, of students that didn't weren't deemed needy enough to get funding, however, could not then pay for an international internship. So there seemed to be this kind of gap between them. And I will say that CRCC Asia has just begun a new scholarship, which kind of turns away, if you like, from kind of financial need, and instead is taking what we're calling kind of highly underrepresented groups to increase the diversity and to make these opportunities available across the board. So they're specifically targeting, for example, Jewish students or Latinx students, minority, different groups where suddenly we're not saying, okay, who can't afford to go, but instead we're saying, let's make sure that we're really diversifying our pool of students that we're sending abroad.
Yeah, the only thing I would really add is, yes, and this is something that's not always a numeric response. So our financial aid office does partner with us closely to provide us, they don't tell us exactly what each student's need is, but they do give us a ranking scale. So what we've done with Penn's financial aid office is developed a 1 to 5 scale of need, and that is purely financial. So we have a way that we calculate need based just on that kind of 1 to 5. But in addition, again, going back to partnerships, we do partner with our diversity offices. And so this is a way to tap into students that may not have this, they may not be a 5, on the financial aid scale, but they may be interacting with another diversity office on campus that is aware of other context and is able to either work with us to find a way to support that student, or in some cases, they are able to support the student. We do also ask students to write an essay if they're looking for funding. They're not always interested in finding funding, by the way, which is interesting, but when they are, we ask them to include any additional context, both financial and other circumstances that may be going on, which we always take into consideration. And lastly, we always work to identify other financial sources, not just off campus, but on campus. So their academic departments are often quite supportive. And so thinking about who they also know on campus and mix and matching funding is always a good way to go.
Great. And this question might be more about providing a foundation to international internships and the broad process, but could you expand on the selection process and the internship abroad search process? In other words, do students secure internship positions abroad before they apply to UPenn, CRCC or more, or after?
So are you saying, are you asking if we're placing the student in an internship or if they're finding their own placement? Do I understand that correctly?
I believe so.
Okay, so we are placing the students. So what we are doing in Penn Abroad through the GRIP program is that we are maintaining relationships with providers like CRCC and directly with a portfolio of employers. And we are building out those opportunities for internships. So we have a whole lengthy process in place where we gather job descriptions, eligibility, and we actually market each of those internships, manage the application process, and work with employers to manage the admissions process.
Great. And when you work with employers directly, how do you provide the other aspects of the internship, including housing and more? Do you work with partners for those aspects?
I think that's for me too. Sorry, Rachel. Usually we leave it to the student. And so, but not always. So I'll give a couple examples. So first and foremost, I will share that my philosophy and the GRIP philosophy is it's all about transparency and it's all about managing student expectations. I would never, ever, ever dream of saying, great, you're going to have everything provided, and then surprise, you have to find your own housing. It's all about giving students different types of opportunities and letting them know what's going to fall on them and what we are providing. And so with our provider-run programs, for example, the programs that we run with CRCC is providing the housing, and that's included in all of our marketing materials. However, in our direct placements where we're working specifically with a supervisor at a particular company, we are letting the student know up front that we are not providing housing, and it is on them to find their own housing. What we do, however, is we do work closely with our employers to ensure that they're prepared to help students. So we have that built into our employer agreements that they will advise students on resources for finding housing, safe neighborhoods, things like that. But ultimately, it does fall to the student to find their own housing in those regards. So it's a little bit more of an independent experience, and we try to put that right up front.
And the final question we have going right now is, do you have a 24/7 on-call rota for supporting students abroad?
I can just quickly jump in and say at the University of Michigan, we've had that probably for the last 5 years only. And it lets everybody sleep better at night, basically knowing that students are able to contact somebody on the ground 24/7. However, it's certainly the case that many universities and institutions do not have the capability to have somebody available on the phone. And I think that's really where the provider can play a truly essential, critical role. Knowing that the student can have somebody on site there that they can contact in any type of emergency, really lets both staff, university staff, and parents indeed sleep better at night.
Yep, and I will say that I am incredibly lucky. I have been on 24/7 rotations before at previous institutions, but Penn is very lucky to have a risk management office. And so an emergency that takes place abroad, students are directed to call our campus police number, who are trained to triage anything happening globally to the on-call person in the risk management office. So different office from us. And then from there, if it's one of Penn Abroad's students, it would triage to me only if it's a GRIP student and only if they need me. So it's a nice layer of removal, but certainly I know that I'm very privileged to have that. And I think it is fairly common to have a rotation, yes. Someone is on call. It's just not me, which is great.
Great. Well, we did go a little over time. We do have a couple more minutes. If anyone has any additional questions, we are happy to get them by text, or you can even just raise your hand and verbally ask them. If not, we will conclude the webinar, and we do thank you so much for giving up your lunchtime or evening to join us today and learn more about international internships, the benefit of all this hard work and how it can pay off. Please do feel free to reach out to myself or with any questions, and we can definitely direct you to Rachel and Erica as well. And we do thank you for your support.
Thanks, and I'll just add, this is the second in our series of 4 webinars. We will have another one in April, and we're going to be talking about our relationships with employers. So hopefully we will see you back online in April, and you can join us. Take a look for the slides coming your way soon, and please feel free to share them with your colleagues.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure.